Good morning. Welcome to the stream. My name is Dr. Rachel Tapman, and this is my channel, which is for anybody who cares about language technology and other people. And today we're going to talk about language technology. I mean, we always do, but in particular, we're going to be talking about my, ooh, a little peeky. Let me adjust the audio so it's less bad to listen to. And in particular, we're talking about my personal favorite pieces of language technology. And when we get to the end of sort of the prepared slides, that's when I'll take questions and sort of look through the chat. So if I'm ignoring you, know that I'm plowing ahead through my slides, and then we'll talk a little bit. So, what am I looking for in a piece of language technology, right? Like, what makes me just get, well, I mean, not excited, but really happy to use something. So a big thing is it should be boring, right? It should solve a problem. It shouldn't be especially, exciting or flashy. It should be ignorable. I should, be able to not even notice that it's doing nothing, ideally. Big one, it has to save me time. And there's actually been quite a bit of research done, I know certainly on chatbots, and that's found that the thing that makes people like a chatbot is that it saves them time, and that's pretty much the number one factor that people consider. It should increase access. So if you're familiar with the idea of accessibility, being able to, do and interact with things, that's very important to me. And it should work. It should actually do the thing that you are using it to do. And I'll say that all of my top 5 are things that I actually use a lot. And in fact, I'm pretty sure I used all of them in putting together this stream. Like, I definitely used them all, within this week. But I've also used them to make this. So I'm gonna start with a little bit of a story about me as a child. So to give you an idea of, what language technology that seems like it should be there and just kind of wasn't, is, and what that's like as a user. So I'm dyslexic, and in grade school, I really struggled. So certainly in my education, a big part of it was spelling tests, and then right around the time when we started moving from handwriting papers to being expected to type papers. So this would have been in the late 90s, early 2000s. I struggled even more. Typing was extremely difficult for me. I made a lot of errors. It would take me, 10 minutes to type a sentence, like extremely, extremely painful, very, very slow. And, this is a timeline at the bottom. All right, one sec. Let me click back into where I was. I've been surprised by this interface. Extremely, extremely slow, was really, really struggling. And in the school I was at the time, one of the, the IT people, the school was like, well, there's this new technology, speech recognition that might be able to help you out. So this would have been Dragon Naturally Speaking, again, way back in the day. And it was not a success, I would say. So a couple things about that. So children's voices are more difficult for speech recognition systems. Children tend to have a lot more variation. And B, there's just less signal to noise, right? Children, smaller lungs, smaller bodies, very high pitched, very easy to mask by other background noises. And we're talking like error rates in excess of 80%. So, I'd say 10 words and 2 of them would be transcribed correctly and the rest just wouldn't be. And that was awful, right? This was supposed to help improve my accessibility, right? It was supposed to help me be able to do my work, my schoolwork, and it made it even more difficult. So when language technology works bad, right, when the promises aren't fulfilled, it's really very frustrating, which means that, the bottom rung is very, very low. So being able to fulfill the promises, to work seamlessly, to be boring and just sort of part of people's lives and work well is very difficult, right? It's not simple to build. All right. Gosh darn. Sorry, you got a little sneak peek of the first draft of the thumbnail, which was not particularly good. All right, so classic YouTube count up. I'm going to start with 5, my 5th favorite. And this is specialized NLU, natural language understanding. So particularly for setting reminders and timers. And the idea here is that you say something with natural language about a time, and it just sort of works. So an app that I use quite a lot is Todoist, which is a to-do list app. And when you are adding things, you can just create a new item and then say when you want it to happen, right? So in this example, which is from their blog, go for a run, and then the natural language was every other day, starting today and ending December 1st, and that will automatically be added to your to-do list on the relevant days. Another, good example, Google Assistant has like a reminder feature and a timer feature, and I want to say the timer feature is one of, if not the most used feature of Google Assistant. And again, you say things in natural language and it just works, right? I don't have to open a calendar interface. I don't have to remember keywords. I don't have to click through an interface. I use the input that I want, and it works the way I want it to work. So these types of systems, mostly rule-based is my understanding. So Duckling is a popular framework for that. And when I was at Rasa, something that we used and recommended. And Duckling is just a bunch of rules built by hand. Tend to be very fast, very robust, pretty simple, right? You can just use an API. Much faster than a specialized interface. So, I also use a digital calendar, and like going through and like clicking through things and like making sure, setting the periodicity of things in particular can be particularly difficult, whereas just using a natural language interface saves so much time. I do this, again, like pretty much every day, sometimes multiple times a day. And if like me, so for me, clocks are a huge issue. I kind of can't read analog clocks, and it was not because I was not taught how. It's because they're just very hard for me, which I think is honestly true for a lot of people in my age bracket and younger. And calendars, I don't struggle as much with calendars, but I know lots of people do. So having something that's just natural language interface, the way that you would express it, and just sort of works is great. Use it all the time. Great use of technology. I notice it because I worked in NLU, but I think a lot of people can just sort of ignore it. Don't you dare. All right, number 4. Another one that I imagine most of you have used, natural language search. So the idea is you're searching for something and you just type what you want in natural language. And I would guess that most of you probably use this multiple times a day. So most search engines currently can use natural language search. And those of you who've been around a little bit longer, you may remember if I wanted to find something, I had to go to the library and look it up. Earlier on because, books were the only place that the information was, and then a little bit later on because I didn't have internet access at home, so I needed to go to the library to use the internet. And it very slow, right? Like if I wanted to know, the tide times tables for a state I was going to visit, very difficult to find. Now I can, just search it and get it really, really easily. And before that, a lot of search was really revolving around keywords, if you remember that. little history, maybe some little nostalgia for some of you. And that is you had to remember the specific word that was being used to index something. And if you didn't, you couldn't find it. Or, frankly, raw SQL. Any of you who've, worked with databases quite a bit may be familiar with that. And it's much less easy, right? You have to... it's a specialized skill. So just being able to say what you want and then get it, also fairly recent. I would say Ask Jeeves, hence that guy, was probably the first commercial product that used it. And that would have been in, 96, I think? So younger than I am, put it that way. So that is 4, natural language search. Use it all the time, very helpful, much easier than the alternatives. All right, number 3, speech to text. So, my little story at the beginning talking about how it did not help. Honestly, it works now, right? I use, so particularly on my phone, I pretty much only use speech to text to put text in. So this is specifically using this for inputting text, which is a little bit different than some of the other uses of speech to text that we'll talk about a little bit later. So for me, hugely been accessibility. Like I pretty much didn't text before speech to text was the thing, for a couple reasons, but being able to put in like if any of y'all ever used the phones with the, you had to like press the button multiple times to cycle through the letters that were on the button, some people were very fast at it. I was not. So made using a phone for text input significantly easier. That said, there's room for improvement for sure. So there's a lot of issues around equity. This was something that I researched in grad school, and there continues to be more work on it, and there continue to be issues here. So not every language has easily accessible speech-to-text libraries. Different sociolects have different rates of success using these very standardizing sort of systems. Robustness continues to be an issue. They break, and when they do, it's particularly frustrating. And then something that I've noticed is that particularly end-to-end systems that are using large language models, I have noticed personally in my use of speech to text, like I said, I use it a lot, and I'm enough of a linguist to sort of like be able to guess about what's going on. I found in particular issues more recently, last year or two, where the source of the error seems to be that the audio, like the signal, like the speech signal is being downplayed, and the language model is being upplayed, right? So it's something that in a corpus would probably have been more likely, but in what I said, like the speech signal that I produced was significantly less likely, which has been very frustrating, right? Because, even though most common words are very common, the ones that are most important, particularly for, using natural language search, for example, are going to be the rarer words, and I want those ones to be right. So lots of room for improvement, has come a long way, certainly would not have been on this list as a child, but something I use all the time. And I hope will continue to improve and increase accessibility for everybody. All right, number 2. Spell check. Again, I'm sure many of you also use spell check. So I mentioned that, in grade school, there was a grade I almost did not pass because I am that bad at spelling. And without spell check, I probably wouldn't have graduated high school, right? If I'd had to have typed everything on a typewriter using a dictionary and I would have been marked down if I misspelled things, it would have been a very bad time for me. And I did graduate high school, and then I went to college, and I graduated college, and I went to grad school, and I finished a dissertation, and spell check was, the MVP there, really. So just great technology, big fan of it. It's very robust, it's very fast. Grammar checkers I tend to care less about. I think they tend to be more helpful for L2 speakers. But spell checks in particular, you hardly even notice it. It's very seamless. I use it all the time. Hello, Multi-Solutions, welcome. Big fan of spell check. Probably couldn't do what I do in any capacity without it. So cheers to spell check. Also, fairly straightforward to build a spell check system if you're looking for an NLP project to sort of like get your beak wet. Especially using sort of older Markov chain and frequency-based models. And now, before we do number 1, I'm going to do that thing. We do a little detour for some honorable mentions. So these are things that I like, that I think are really cool, but all of them have like a big asterisk next to them, right? A big like, except for, it's so close, but, so let's talk about them. So first off, we have automatic captions. So I mentioned speech to text for text input, where me, who is putting in the text, also is looking at the output of speech to text and can like manipulate it. That very useful, again, room for improvement. Automatic captions, if there was genuinely no way that people were going to have access to oral, A-U-R-A-L, oral, O-R-A-L, modalities otherwise, then I think it can improve access, especially in places where like there is no, legal requirement that people do that. But unfortunately, a kind of a pattern is that people who are in a situation where they should be providing interpretation will instead use automatic captions, which reduces accessibility, right? So, for deaf folks, a qualified interpreter is always going to be more valuable than automatic captions. And there's actually a sort of a term for automatic captions in this situation, autocraptions. So I know a lot of stenographers are also, nonplussed by the quality of the automatic captions. So like they can be good. I would be very careful about where you use them. Better than nothing, but certainly not a replacement for, hand captions or hand done captions or interpretation. Voice assistants. So this is, for me at least, I think this is a particularly interesting one because I used to use voice assistants a lot more and I stopped. And when they work well, right, it can be very seamless. It can save you a lot of time. It can be very convenient. But, there's some problems. And I think for me right now, the biggest one is that there's really big safety and privacy concerns. So voice data in particular is biometric data. It's linkable to you as an individual. It contains, a lot of information about your, social identity. And particularly for voice assistants that work sort of based on, a wake word and the ambient sound, the likelihood that you're going to accidentally record something you didn't mean to record is extremely high. And yeah, you can always look up the privacy policies of any sort of voice technology you're interested in using. Yeah, so that's a big side of things, right? I don't think we have privacy legislation right now that makes me feel particularly comfortable using voice assistants. And the other thing is, and I think this is just a problem of the modality, is that it's very hard to discover what a voice assistant can do, and any way that you try to nudge people ends up being very irritating, right? So there's no, they're not usually interacting with them until you specifically wake them up, right? B, there's not usually a visual interface. Some of them have them, but not all of them do. So, really the only way to tell people about a new thing a voice assistant can do is when you wake it up to be like, sure, I'll play some music. But first, did you know that you can, right? And try to shove it in that turn, which makes the turn take longer, which is frustrating for the user. Or, appending it to the end. Or the worst option, which I don't know if it's currently deployed anywhere, but I've certainly seen discussions of it, is to wake the system not at the bequest of the user in order to tell them about a discoverability thing, right? So if I am talking about a TV show and my, smart speaker detects that is the topic of a conversation and perks up and says, by the way, you can play that on your TV using the voice command. Very convenient. See point above about the extreme safety and privacy concerns. So, yeah, I think we could get there, particularly with stronger, privacy legislation. But yeah, I have my concerns. And then the third one that I think is just, it's so cool, is ultrasound for speech therapy. So ultrasound, just like, all the other places you use ultrasound, basically lets you see air pockets inside flesh. I'm trying to think of a better word than flesh, but there you go. And sort of it gives you an idea of the difference in density, and particularly for speech. So if I'm looking this way, the vocal tract here is what's being represented. Ooh, am I looking the same way? No, there we go. So I'm looking this way, right? This is the profile that you're looking at there. And you have, the oral cavity and the sinus cavity. And you can see both of those really well on ultrasound. And this is actually from a paper that makes it even easier to use. So from the Acoustic Society of America meeting in 2019 by Mozarafi and Sankoff, and I believe the first author there has also published similar or extensions of that work in some IEEE conferences. So extracting the contour of the tongue, which can be really helpful in speech therapy because, if you're trying to get somebody to put their tongue in a specific place to make a specific sound, having, visual feedback is really, really invaluable. And, really opens up a lot of therapy options for speech therapy. So super, super cool tech. Big fan of it. However, why is it not on my list? Well, one is that not everyone needs speech therapy, so it's very impactful where it's impactful, but it's not going to be, you know, universally accessible. I don't use it. I've never been to speech therapy. And also, it's pretty expensive. So a very cheap ultrasound is around $4,000 US, and they go much higher than that. So not super accessible either. But again, potential to be extremely impactful where it is, and then it's medical data. So certainly in the US is covered by stronger privacy regulations. So some cool technology that have some asterisks, stars, little stars next to them. All right, number one, top of the list. Autocomplete. I don't know if this is a surprise to anyone or not, but if you code a lot, coding without autocomplete for me is like, I don't want to say it's physically painful because it's not, but it's very, it's deeply, deeply frustrating, right? Yeah, it feels like having my hands tied behind my back. I can't quite do the thing I want to do. And the amount of time that it has saved me is unbelievable, right? Like I'm a pretty fast typist. I'm not a very accurate typist. Side note here, one of the things that seems to be genetically linked to dyslexia, at least in some populations, is so like tapping, like so. The ability to regulate the timing there to fine-grained levels seems to be something that is more difficult for people with dyslexia with these certain genetic markers. And I want to say that's Batya Friedman's work out of the University of Washington. She has a deaf family, a dyslexic family she works with that has like a strong, predisposition towards it, and they've done some gene studying. Anyway, so I'm a very fast typer. I'm not a very accurate typer, which means that, like, yes, I don't have to type as much, but the big thing is I don't have to type things the same every time. I can, start typing it, autocomplete, pick the right one, and move on, right? So the ability to, have consistency in variable names has saved me so much time. I cannot tell you how much time. And actually, when I was growing up, so my mom was way back in the day, she also was a programmer, and she worked with Fortran and BASIC and the venerable languages of old. And she told me when I was busy failing every spelling test, I think I passed like 2 or 3 spelling tests, like not 100% like passed in second grade. But anyway, she told me, in programming, it doesn't matter how you spell things as long as it's consistent, which I'm also not great about. So this helps me be consistent, even if the first spelling is not the best. So my number one time saver, favorite language technology is autocomplete. It really, really is. So I'm gonna open it up for chats. What is y'all's favorite language technology? And if you're watching on the replay, please feel free to pop it in the comments and I'll take a look, because I'm always really interested to see. I build language technology. Like, the reason I got into this field is that I believe that it has, a tremendous ability to impact people in their lives. And I think that it's very important. And I think that language technology is different from other types of technology because language is different from other types of data. And that's how I got here. And, I use it every day. I genuinely benefit from language technology. I genuinely believe it can be a force for good and improve people's lives and increase accessibility, and has certainly let me get where I am, right? Because of, the language technology available to me, my disability has not prevented me from, academic success, and has not, once I reached a certain threshold, and hasn't prevented me from having a career that is very text input heavy, right? Where I have to produce a lot of language. And I'm very grateful, and I really want, I want more and better for folks in the future. And yeah, that's why I'm here. Maybe it's why you're here as well. Oh, Bob says machine translation. Yeah, so that's something I thought about, right? Pros and cons, right? I would say it's one of those things that has an asterisk for me, right? So I think it's like auto captions. It can be helpful when there was no other option, right? It's harmful when it replaces higher quality options. Um, but I also think machine translation in particular does have more capacity for harm than a lot of these things. Um, so if you're familiar, there was a while ago, I believe it was on Facebook, but there was an automated translation of, I want to say, Palestinian Arabic, that translated somebody saying good morning to attack them. And as a result, the person who had said, good morning on Facebook was arrested. And yeah, I think they ended up being okay. I should find the citation. I can't put it in this window, but yeah. So I think that where it is used, in a situation where there's a potential for physical harm to the people whose language is being translated, it can be um, tricky, right? And also what languages get translated, right? And what are you translating from and what are you translating to? Like we talked about on last Thursday, Arabic, right? As like this idea of a monolithic language when, the varieties of Arabic are extremely different from each other. So which varieties do you target? What varieties do you target? Are you only going to work with modern standard Arabic? Well, that doesn't, increase access to a lot of people. So yeah. Also, there's Amanda Lynn Paulita, who also is out of the University of Washington's PhD program, wrote a really good piece for, what's the online journal? Starts with a D. It's not The Intercept, but it's like The Intercept. Anyway, she wrote a really good piece for an online journal about the history of machine translation. And certainly in the US, it is 100% funded by the military and used for military measures. And yeah, I think like a discussion of US imperialism is a little bit out of scope. But yeah, I think it has the potential for good, but I think it also has much higher potential for harm than a lot of these things. So. Alexi says, I'm not a English speaker, but being able to understand at least half the articles I read was like magic when I was learning. Yeah, I think that's a great example of where it can be very, very beneficial. But it's one of those things that, I worry about. Ballast 2 says, semantics derived automatically from language corpora containing human-like biases by Dr. Aylin Kaliskan showed gender biases from Turkish to English. Yes, I believe I've read that. So if I'm remembering correctly, that's the paper that looked at, sorry, I'm trying to hide my cursor behind my head. That's the paper that looked at gender neutral. So I believe Turkish has a gender neutral pronoun similar to the English they, singular they, that's very common. And it was looking at how that was translated into English because it was being translated into she or he when professions were associated with it. So something like, they are a doctor would be translated to he is a doctor because of gender bias, or they are a nurse would be translated to she is a nurse. I'm pretty sure that's the paper. So this would be an example where machine translation would introduce biases that weren't there in the original text in a way that, again, might end up being harmful in the long term. So yeah, it's like, it's one of those things, right? Like it's like voice assistants. If they are very helpful for you, they're very helpful for you, but there's definitely a trade-off. And it's whether or not, you choose to use it. Yeah, I did think quite a lot about machine translation when I was doing this. And I'm going to actually see if I can find that that article I mentioned by Mandolin, so I can post that in the chat for y'all, because I think it's just interesting to know the history of the field. And just because it's growing so quickly, I think a lot of folks the gradient, not the intercept. I think a lot of folks don't necessarily have the sort of traditional, I pop the link in there, the traditional background where like part of doing a PhD is you read basically everything that has ever been written in your scholarly tradition on the thing that you're researching, right? So, and then you synthesize it, right? And you say, okay, here's all these pieces of information and how they fit together. I think that's just not as common right now in the field as it was, 20 years ago, when everyone who was working in it had a PhD, and a lot of them worked for the Department of Defense, etc. So, yeah. All right, so I'm gonna leave it there. It doesn't look like anyone else has any other things in the chat, but again, please feel free to leave a comment. I'm really interested, right? I always like to, I know I've been talking a lot lately about things that I think don't work and maybe we shouldn't be doing, but I always like to, when it comes up or when I have a chance, talk about things that do work and I think we should be doing, and shout out things that I think are a good use of time. And all of these things, these things have genuinely improved my life. Use them every day. Would recommend and enjoy using them. So, all right, I'm gonna wrap it up here. We'll be back on Thursday for our coffee chat, is what that's called. And I hope to see you there. It'll be at the same time, 10 a.m. Pacific. Nope, 10 a.m. Eastern, this time that we're in right now. And I will be talking about, research news, things like that. And if you'd like the links for that, those are available to my coffee supporters over there in the little corner thing in the window. So hope to see you then. Otherwise, have a great week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I will talk to you soon. Bye. Oop.